They intended for this date to be a humiliating public spectacle, a cruel prank to break a struggling single father. They matched Brendan with a woman who couldn't speak, hear, or walk, expecting him to run. They never anticipated that her silence would be the catalyst that destroyed their own empires. Brendan Hayes sat in the glow of his computer monitor, the blue light illuminating the deep circles under his eyes. At 34, he carried the weight of a man a decade older. His desk at Zenith Logistics, a mid-tier supply chain firm in downtown Chicago, was covered in shipping manifests and unpaid medical bills. It had been 3 years since his wife passed away, leaving him to raise their 6-year-old daughter, Lily, all on his own. Lily was his entire world, but the world was expensive. Between her asthma treatments, the cost of after-school care, and the crushing weight of his late wife's hospital debts, Brendan was drowning. He needed the vacant regional manager position. He needed it with a desperation that kept him awake at night, staring at the ceiling of his cramped apartment in Logan Square. His desperation was no secret in the office. Unfortunately, it had become the prime entertainment for the office's self-appointed elites, Greg Mitchell, the arrogant VP of sales, and Sylvia Vargas, the sharp-tongued HR director. "You look like you're about to collapse, Hayes," Greg sneered, leaning against Brendan's cubicle wall, swirling a cup of premium coffee. "You need to get out, have a drink, meet a woman. When was the last time you went on a date? Sometime during the Obama administration?" Brendan didn't look up from his spreadsheets. "I don't have time for dates, Greg. I have Lily." "That's exactly why you need this," Sylvia chimed in, clicking her designer heels as she approached. She offered a sickeningly sweet smile. "Actually, Brendan, I have a friend. She's incredibly successful, comes from serious money, and she's been complaining about how hard it is to meet a genuinely good, dependable guy. Someone grounded. I immediately thought of you." Brendan finally stopped typing. He looked at Sylvia, his internal alarms ringing. Sylvia had never done a single kind thing for him in the 5 years he'd worked at Zenith. Why would a wealthy, successful woman want to go out with a guy drowning in freight logistics who drives a 2012 Honda Civic? Because she's tired of the finance bros and trust fund babies, Sylvia said smoothly, exchanging a fleeting covert glance with Greg. Look, she has connections, major connections, the kind of connections that could put a good word in with corporate about that regional manager spot you've been begging for. Just one dinner. If it doesn't work out, you get a free meal at Ever in Fulton Market. I already made the reservation. The mention of the regional manager position was the hook. Sylvia knew exactly where to strike. Brendan thought about Lily's inhalers, the rent hike coming next month, and the worn-out soles of his daughter's favorite sneakers. "Fine," Brendan said, his voice tight. "One dinner. What's her name?" "Madeline." Sylvia smiled, her eyes gleaming with a predatory amusement. "Just wear your best suit, Brendan. She's very special." What Brendan didn't know was that Sylvia and Greg had met Madeline Foster 2 weeks prior at a corporate charity gala. Madeline was indeed wealthy, but she had been involved in a devastating car accident 18 months earlier in the Swiss Alps. The crash had severed her spinal cord and caused severe nerve damage, leaving her paralyzed from the chest down and profoundly deaf. Greg and Sylvia found the idea of setting up the exhausted, desperate single dad with a woman who couldn't speak, hear, or walk to be the ultimate comedy. They had taken a corner booth at the restaurant for themselves, planning to order martinis and watch Brendan squirm, panic, and inevitably flee from the uncomfortable situation, ruining any chance he had at the promotion. It was a cruel, twisted game for people who had too much money and too little empathy. That Friday evening, Brendan stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of his only decent suit. It was a navy two-piece he'd bought for a funeral, slightly too loose around the shoulders now, because he frequently skipped meals to ensure Lily had enough. "You look like James Bond, Daddy," Lily said, standing in the doorway in her pajamas, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Brendan smiled, the tension in his chest easing just a fraction. He knelt to her eye level. "You think so, Bug? James Bond usually has a cooler car." "You're better than him," she whispered, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "Have fun. Don't worry about me. Mrs. Gable is going to let me stay up and watch a movie." Kissing her forehead, Brendan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't going on this date for love. He was going to network, to impress, to secure a future for his little girl. He grabbed his keys and headed out into the biting Chicago wind, unaware that he was walking directly into a trap designed to humiliate him. The atmosphere inside Ever was intimidating. The lighting was low and amber, the acoustics perfectly engineered to hush the conversations of Chicago's elite. Brendan felt profoundly out of place as the maitre d' took his coat. "Reservation for Hayes," Brendan said, smoothing down his tie. "Ah, yes, Mr. Hayes. Your guest has already arrived. Right this way." Brendan followed the host through the labyrinth of sleek, curved booths. As they approached a secluded table near the floor-to-ceiling windows, Brendan stopped. Sitting at the table was a woman who took his breath away, though not in the way he had expected. Madeline had striking, sharp features, with dark hair swept elegantly over one shoulder. She wore a stunning silk emerald dress. But what immediately caught Brendan's attention was the sophisticated, custom-built motorized wheelchair she sat in. As Brendan approached, Madeline didn't look up. She was staring out the window, watching the city lights. "Miss Foster," Brendan said gently. She didn't react, not a flinch. Brendan frowned, stepping into her line of sight. When Madeline finally saw him, her piercing green eyes locked onto his. There was a profound stillness about her. She didn't offer a hand to shake. Instead, she slowly raised a sleek, high-end tablet from her lap, tapped the screen a few times, and turned it toward him. The screen read, "Good evening, Brendan. I am deaf. I am also paralyzed from the chest down. I cannot speak to you, and I cannot hear your voice. My name is Madeline. Please, sit." Brendan felt the blood drain from his face. The reality of the situation hit him like a physical blow. Sylvia. Greg. The smirk on Greg's face, the sickly sweet tone of Sylvia's voice. She's very special. They had set him up. They knew exactly who she was. They had sent a struggling, financially desperate single father on a blind date with a woman who required immense accommodation, purely for their own twisted entertainment. Instinctively, Brendan's eyes darted around the restaurant. Sure enough, tucked in a shadowed booth near the bar, he spotted them. Greg was holding a glass of scotch, trying to suppress a laugh, while Sylvia watched with hawk-like anticipation. They were waiting for him to excuse himself to the bathroom and never return. They were waiting for him to break. A hot, fierce anger ignited in Brendan's chest, not at the woman in front of him, but at the sheer cruelty of the world. He looked back at Madeline. She was watching him closely, her expression neutral, guarded. She had likely seen men run from her before. She was waiting for his rejection. Brendan took a deep breath. He pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down squarely. He looked her directly in the eyes, offering a warm, genuine smile. He didn't know sign language, so he pulled out his own battered smartphone, opened a blank note, typed a message, and slid it across the table. "It is an absolute honor to meet you, Madeline. I'm Brendan. And just so you know, the people who set us up are currently hiding by the bar, expecting me to run away. But I have no intention of leaving. I'd love to share dinner with you, if you'll have me." Madeline read the screen. For a fleeting second, a look of genuine shock crossed her face, followed by a slight narrowing of her eyes as she glanced toward the bar. She saw Greg and Sylvia. Her jaw tightened imperceptibly. She took her tablet and began to type. Her fingers moved with startling speed, a flurry of precise, elegant motions. She turned the screen to him. "They work with you?" Brendan typed back. "Yes. They are my superiors. They know I am a single dad desperate for a promotion, so they used my situation and yours for a joke." For warm fools. Madeline stared at the screen for a long time. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away as Brendan watched the gears turning in her mind. Despite her physical paralysis, there was a formidable, commanding energy radiating from her. She wasn't a victim. Brendan could sense that instantly. There was a hardened steel behind her green eyes. She typed again, sliding the tablet across the white tablecloth. Most men would have walked out to save face. "Why didn't you?" Brendan didn't hesitate. He typed, "Because my 6-year-old daughter, Lily, thinks I'm James Bond, and James Bond doesn't run away from a beautiful woman just because the situation is complicated. Also, nobody deserves to be the punchline of Greg Mitchell's joke." A slow, breathtaking smile spread across Madeline's face. It completely transformed her, softening the sharp angles of her features. She signaled the waiter with a subtle nod. When the waiter approached, he didn't hand them menus. He looked at Madeline with deep reverence. "Miss Foster, the usual for you? And for your guest?" Madeline tapped her tablet and showed it to the waiter. The waiter nodded respectfully and walked away. She turned the tablet to Brendan. "I took the liberty of ordering the chef's tasting menu for us. I hope you're hungry, Brendan." For the next 2 hours, they communicated purely through text. It was the most intimate, intense conversation Brendan had ever had. Without the interruption of spoken words, every sentence had to be deliberate. Brendan poured his heart out about Lily, about his late wife, about the crushing pressure of trying to be a good father while working a dead-end job in a toxic company. Madeline listened, or rather read, with unwavering focus. She shared her own story. She explained that she had lost her hearing and mobility in an accident in Switzerland. She described the agonizing months of rehabilitation, the friends who abandoned her when she was no longer the life of the party, and the profound isolation of living in a world completely devoid of sound. Yet as the night progressed, Brendan noticed something peculiar. The staff at Ever didn't just treat Madeline as a wealthy patron. The head chef came out to bow to her. The sommelier brought out a vintage bottle of wine that wasn't on the menu, pouring it with shaking hands. As dessert was cleared, Brendan glanced over his shoulder. Greg and Sylvia were still at the bar, but they no longer looked amused. They looked confused, irritated that Brendan hadn't played his part in their cruel script. Madeline noticed his glance. She picked up her tablet and typed a paragraph that took her a full minute to compose. When she finally turned the screen to him, the words shattered everything Brendan thought he knew about this evening. "Your colleagues think they played a trick on you, Brendan, but the joke is entirely on them. Zenith Logistics was quietly acquired 3 days ago by a private equity firm in New York. I am the CEO of that firm. I came to Chicago in secret to evaluate the management team before the restructuring is announced on Monday." Greg and Sylvia just showed me exactly who they are. And more importantly, you showed me who you are. Brendan stared at the glowing letters, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked up at Madeline, completely stunned. She took the tablet back, deleted the text, and typed one final, chilling sentence for the night. On Monday morning, you and I are going to fire them. The weekend passed in an agonizing blur of surreal disbelief for Brendan. He spent Saturday at the local park with Lily, pushing her on the swings while his mind continuously replayed the glowing text on Madeline's tablet. I am the CEO. You and I are going to fire them. Was it a joke? A sophisticated continuation of Greg and Sylvia's cruel prank? He had researched the private equity firm Madeline mentioned, Foster and Webb Holdings. The company was notoriously private, a behemoth in the corporate acquisition world, but the CEO was indeed listed as M. Foster. There were very few photographs available online, primarily due to her fierce protection of her privacy following the devastating accident in Switzerland, but the pieces fit perfectly. When Monday morning arrived, the sky over Chicago was a heavy, bruised, gray, threatening rain. Brendan walked into the Zenith Logistics office at exactly 7:30. The atmosphere was thick with the usual Monday dread, amplified by the looming rumors of corporate buyouts that always seemed to circulate when bonuses were delayed. Brendan had barely logged into his terminal when a shadow fell across his desk. Greg Mitchell stood there, a smug, venomous grin plastered across his face, holding his signature cup of artisanal coffee. Sylvia Vargas flanked him, clutching a pristine clipboard like a shield. Well, if it isn't the romantic hero, Greg mocked, leaning heavily against the flimsy cubicle partition. We were genuinely surprised you didn't run crying to the bathroom, Hayes. How was the silent treatment? Did she tell you all about her fascinating hobbies in sign language? Sylvia let out a sharp, breathless laugh. Oh, stop it, Greg. Honestly, Brendan, we just wanted to see if you had the patience required for the regional manager role. Dealing with difficult, unresponsive clients is part of the job. Consider it a field test. Brendan slowly took his hands off his keyboard. He looked up at them, feeling a profound sense of calm washing over him. The desperation that usually choked him in their presence was completely gone. It was an incredibly illuminating evening, Brendan said evenly, his voice steady. I learned a great deal about the true nature of this company. Greg sneered, adjusting his expensive tie. Whatever helps you sleep in that dump of an apartment, Hayes. By the way, the regional manager spot. It's going to an external hire. We need aggressive blood, not a tired babysitter. Pack up your little hopes and dreams. Before Brendan could respond, a piercing chime echoed over the office intercom system. The abrasive voice of the receptionist, normally bored and monotonous, sounded breathless and panicked. Attention all personnel. An emergency all-hands meeting is commencing immediately in the main atrium. All staff, including department heads, are required to attend. Immediate attendance is mandatory. Greg frowned, exchanging a bewildered look with Sylvia. What the hell is this? I have a golf outing with the regional distributors at noon. Just come on, Sylvia snapped, suddenly looking nervous. You heard the rumors last week. The board has been hiding something. Brendan stood up, buttoning his worn suit jacket. He followed the murmuring crowd of employees toward the sprawling, glass-paneled atrium at the center of the building. The space was quickly filling with anxious workers. At the front of the room, a temporary stage had been hastily assembled, complete with a massive digital projector screen. At exactly 8:15, the heavy glass doors of the atrium swung open. The ambient chatter in the room died instantly, replaced by a suffocating, pin-drop silence. 3 men in sharp, impeccably tailored black suits walked in first, their demeanor radiating absolute authority. But it was the person they were flanking that caused the collective breath of the room to hitch. Madeline Foster glided into the room. Her custom-built motorized wheelchair moved silently across the polished tile floor. Today, she was not wearing an elegant dinner dress. She was armored in a charcoal gray power suit that screamed absolute dominance. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, sleek bun, emphasizing the sharp, uncompromising angles of her face. Her piercing green eyes swept over the crowd, cold and calculating. Brendan watched from the middle of the crowd. He saw the exact moment Greg and Sylvia recognized her. Sylvia's pristine clipboard slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly onto the floor. All the blood drained from Greg's face, leaving him looking like a sick, pale ghost. He stumbled back a step, bumping into a water cooler. One of the men in suits, a tall, imposing man with silver hair, stepped up to a microphone beside the projector screen. "Good morning," he said, his voice echoing through the silent atrium. "My name is Harrison Cole. I am the Chief Legal Counsel for Foster and Webb Holdings. As of Friday afternoon, Zenith Logistics was wholly acquired by our firm. We are your new ownership. And this," he gestured respectfully to the woman beside him, "is our Chief Executive Officer, Ms. Madeline Foster." A low gasp rippled through the crowd. Madeline tapped a few commands into the sleek tablet mounted to the armrest of her chair. Instantly, the massive projector screen behind her lit up. Large, crisp black text appeared on the glaring white background, displaying the words she typed in real time. "Good morning," the screen read. "I apologize for my lack of audible greeting. I am completely deaf, and I am paralyzed. I will communicate with you through this screen today. Zenith Logistics has been a target for our portfolio for 6 months. Your operational metrics are acceptable, but your corporate culture is severely diseased." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Brendan kept his eyes fixed on the screen, his heart hammering against his ribs in anticipation. Madeline's fingers flew across her tablet. "Over the past 2 weeks, I have conducted a covert evaluation of your upper management. I believe that a company's leadership should embody integrity, empathy, and professionalism. What I found here was a systemic culture of bullying, harassment, and profound cruelty." The text paused. Madeline turned her chair slightly, her icy gaze locking directly onto the corner where Greg and Sylvia were cowering. "Gregory Mitchell, Sylvia Vargas, step to the front." The command on the screen felt as loud as a gunshot. The crowd parted instantly, leaving Greg and Sylvia isolated. Sylvia was visibly shaking, tears already welling in her eyes. Greg tried to muster his usual arrogant swagger, but his knees were practically knocking together as they stumbled toward the front of the room. On Friday night, the screen continued. These two individuals thought it would be highly entertaining to use my physical disabilities as the punchline of a cruel joke. They set up a dedicated, hard-working employee on a blind date with me, fully expecting him to humiliate himself and flee, thereby justifying their decision to deny him a heavily deserved promotion. Outrage murmured through the crowd of employees. People glared at Greg and Sylvia, the years of accumulated resentment against the two bullies finally bubbling to the surface. They operated under the assumption that vulnerability is a weakness to be exploited, Madeline typed, her face an unreadable mask of corporate fury. "They are wrong. Mr. Mitchell, Ms. Vargas, your behavior violates every ethical standard of Foster and Webb Holdings. You are hereby terminated, effectively immediately, for gross misconduct and creating a hostile work environment. Security will escort you to your desks to collect your personal belongings, and then you will be removed from the premises. If you attempt to contact any employee of this company again, my legal team will bury you in litigation, so deep you will never see the light of day." Sylvia let out a pathetic sob, burying her face in her hands. Greg opened his mouth, desperately trying to formulate an apology, but Harrison Cole stepped forward, flanking them with 2 burly security guards. "Right this way," Harrison said, his voice devoid of any sympathy. As the 2 former executives were humiliatingly marched out of the atrium, a collective sigh of relief washed over the remaining employees. Madeline waited until the doors clicked shut before her fingers moved across the glass screen once more. "This company is now under new management. We will be restructuring immediately to prioritize merit, hard work, and character. We begin today." Madeline's eyes scanned the crowd once more, softening just a fraction when they landed on Brendan. "Brendan Hayes, please come to my temporary office on the top floor in 15 minutes. The top floor corner office, previously occupied by the former CEO, who had fled with his golden parachute, had been entirely transformed. It was stripped of its ostentatious golfing trophies and leather sofas, replaced with sleek, accessible, minimalist furniture that accommodated Madeline's wheelchair. Brendan walked in tentatively, feeling the heavy silence of the room. Madeline was positioned behind a large mahogany desk, gazing out at the Chicago skyline. When she saw him, she offered that same breathtaking, unguarded smile she had shown him at the restaurant. She pointed to a chair opposite her. Brendan sat down. She typed on her tablet, and a computerized, highly realistic text-to-speech voice echoed softly from a speaker on her desk. She had chosen not to use it in the atrium, to maintain a harsh, impersonal authority. But here, in private, she wanted the conversation to flow more naturally. "I hope the morning's theatrics weren't too overwhelming for you, Brendan," the electronic voice said, though her eyes conveyed a warm, human amusement. "I think I'm still in shock," Brendan admitted, letting out a breath he felt he'd been holding for 3 days. "You really fired them." "I amputated a rotting limb to save the body," she replied via the speaker. "But I didn't call you up here to discuss their miserable severance packages. I called you here to discuss your future. I reviewed your personnel file over the weekend. You single-handedly optimized the Midwest routing protocols, saving this company nearly $2 million in operational costs last year. Yet you were passed over for promotion 3 times. Why?" Brendan looked down at his calloused hands. "Because I don't play golf. Because I have a sick daughter who needs me to leave precisely at 5 o'clock. Because I couldn't afford to take executives out for expensive dinners. I just did the work." Madeline nodded slowly, her expression empathetic. She typed rapidly. "The regional manager position is no longer available," the speaker announced. Brendan's heart sank momentarily, bracing for a twist, before the voice continued. "Because I am eliminating that redundant tier of management entirely. Instead, I am appointing you as the Vice President of Regional Operations. Your salary will be tripled, effective immediately, and you will have full autonomy over the Midwest logistics divisions." Brendan was paralyzed. The air vanished from his lungs. "Madeline, I don't know what to say." "Are you sure?" "I don't have the typical executive pedigree." "I do not care about pedigrees," the voice stated firmly. "I care about character. When faced with a situation designed to make you run, you stayed. When confronted with my disability, you did not pity me, and you did not patronize me. You treated me as an equal. You possess a rare integrity, Brendan. I need that in my leadership team." Brendan felt a hot prickle of tears in his eyes. For 3 years, he had been drowning in the dark, suffocating beneath the weight of grief and debt, terrified that his daughter would suffer for his failures. Now, in a matter of minutes, this extraordinary woman had pulled him into the light. "Thank you." Brendan choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what this means for my little girl." Madeline's eyes softened dramatically. She typed again. "There is one more thing. Foster and Webb has a private internal grant designed for employees facing extreme medical hardships. It is entirely discretionary. I have authorized the grant to pay off the remainder of your late wife's hospital debts, in full. The bank transfers were completed an hour ago. You are debt-free, Brendan." Brendan broke. The tears he had fought for years finally spilled over. He buried his face in his hands, weeping not from sorrow, but from a profound, crushing relief. The crushing boulders on his shoulders had been vaporized. Through his tears, he felt a gentle pressure on his arm. He looked up to see Madeline had navigated her chair around the desk. She was holding out a pristine linen handkerchief. He took it, wiping his eyes, offering a watery, genuine laugh. "I'm sorry, I thought I was going to lose everything this month." Madeline smiled softly. She typed a quick message on her tablet and turned it toward him, bypassing the voice speaker for a more intimate communication. "You are a good man, Brendan, and good men deserve to win sometimes." She paused, her fingers hovering over the glass before typing one final line. "Also, since you are now an executive, fraternization rules no longer apply. Are you free this Saturday? I would very much like to formally meet James Bond's daughter." 6 months later, the toxic environment of Zenith Logistics was entirely a thing of the past. Under Brendan's leadership, the regional division flourished, breaking profit records. But his greatest triumph was not in the boardroom. It was a crisp Sunday afternoon in October. The leaves in Millennium Park were turning vibrant shades of gold and crimson. Brendan walked along the paved pathways, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. Beside him, Madeline maneuvered her wheelchair with practiced ease, wrapped in a thick, stylish cashmere coat. A few yards ahead of them, Lily was sprinting through the fallen leaves, her laughter carrying in the autumn wind. She turned around, waving a massive, brightly colored kite. "Look, Maddie, look how high it is," Lily yelled, pointing to the sky. Madeline, of course, could not hear the joyous shout, but she saw the bright, beaming face of the little girl. Brendan caught Madeline's attention, smiled, and then raised his hands. Over the past 6 months, he had dedicated 2 hours every single night to learning American Sign Language. His hands moved fluidly, translating his daughter's joy. "She says, 'Look how high the kite is.'" Madeline's eyes sparkled. She signed back, her movements graceful and precise. "Tell her it's beautiful, just like her." Brendan watched his daughter, and then looked down at the incredible woman who had saved him in more ways than one. They had built a foundation of absolute trust, navigating the complexities of her physical limitations with patience, humor, and a deep, undeniable love. They didn't need spoken words to understand each other. Their connection transcended the boundaries of silence. As they watched the kite dance in the Chicago sky, Brendan reached out and gently rested his hand over Madeline's. She intertwined her fingers with his, squeezing tightly. The cruel joke that was meant to break him had instead given him everything he had ever dreamed of, proving that sometimes the universe's greatest blessings arrive disguised as our darkest moments. Did this incredible story of karma and second chances touch your heart? Sometimes the cruelest intentions pave the way for the most beautiful blessings. If you want to hear more amazing real-life drama, inspiring twists, and stories where the good guys actually win, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel today. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life. Don't forget to ring the notification bell for daily uploads.